Yeah, I actually did think that 40 potentially is about halfway through my life.
Sure.
And I thought, I want to try to stay somewhat healthy. And I had seen some people, again, this was in Roswell, New Mexico, the mayor and a couple of city councilmen were actually runners, marathon runners. And I thought, that looks great. And I'm just going to go do that. And without any reading, without any training, I just pulled up some shorts, threw on a T-shirt, and took off running. And I'd gone about 5 minutes, and all of a sudden I felt extremely tired. Everything was heavy, and I knew I couldn't go much further. And so I walked a little bit. About a minute later, I was fine, and I took off again. Went another 5 minutes. Same thing kind of happened. So I called a buddy of mine who is a marathon runner. He was also in my mortgage business and a very successful guy. And I said, "Hey, you're a marathon runner. What's the deal? What's taking place?" And he said, "Can I be honest with you?" And I was like, "Of course." And he said, "Jeff, you're a wuss." I said, "What do you mean I'm a wuss?" And he said, "Jeff, run 25 minutes and don't stop. Just bust through that human barrier." Yeah. And so I did just that. I took off running and I didn't stop, didn't matter. And at the end of 25 minutes, I had a little chest pain. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's kind of weird. And I really didn't feel like I could say anything to my wife. She was actually in Lubbock, which is only a couple hour drive away from Roswell. And she was with her parents, who had both had open heart surgery within the last 45 days or so. And so I didn't say anything, but I was wrestling with my son there in Lubbock that evening, and I couldn't lift him. And I said something, "Hey, why don't you, let's not do that." Yeah. And my wife heard me and said, "What's going on?" And I told her. She said, "I'm not going through this. You call that cardiologist friend of yours, and let's get this taken care of." Well, needless to say, next morning I was down at the hospital doing all the tests back in Roswell the next morning, and everything was fine. I had a little bit of chest pain, but it wasn't a big deal. And went home about 5:15 that evening. This is kind of the first red flag when your cell phone goes off and a cardiologist is on the other end. And he says, "Jeff, I need to see you and Cindy in my office right now." And I said, "Cindy, why do we need Cindy?" And I kind of trying to joke it off a little bit. And he was like, "Jeff, it's not funny. I need to see you in my office now." And so I said, "That's fine." And so Cindy and I went down there and walking in the hospital area. It's about 5:15, 5:30 then. And some of the employees were leaving. They ushered us in the back, and I thought we were going to a patient's room. We went right into his office, his personal office. That's red flag number 2. And we were sitting there, and he came in, and it's just like on TV. He's got his white lab coat on. He won't make eye contact with me. And he's looking at his clipboard, and he says, "Jeff, I don't know how to tell you this, but you've blown through your mitral valve, and your heart's getting bigger and bigger, and quite frankly, it could explode." Oh my gosh. He said, "You need to get your affairs in order." And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I went to some degree into a shock because I don't remember much more of what was said. Cindy and he talked about how they were going to fly me to Lubbock the next day to have a open heart surgery and try to save my life. But I mean, this was easy math. I've got about 24 hours to live. And so we get in the car and we're headed home, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to call this lady." She was in our mortgage business in El Paso. Her name's Marcy Oglesby, and she's a big prayer warrior, and I'd just like her to pray for me. And I called, and instead of doing that typical Christian thing of, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'll pray for you," she said, "Okay, Jeff, I'll pray, and as soon as I hear what you're supposed to do, I'll call you and tell you exactly what to do." I thought that was really weird, and I just kind of blew it off and went through the rest of my day, maybe hugging my kids a little differently. And next morning on the way to the office to kind of clean things up a little bit, I got a phone call from Marcy, and she said, "Jeff, I know exactly what you're supposed to do." I thought that was kind of weird. I was like, "Okay, tell me." And she said, "Well, I just saw Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz, on Good Morning America, and he was talking about your heart surgery." And I just thankfully she couldn't see my face. I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm not calling him. And I, as respectfully as I could, I hung up. And about that same time, that gentleman that told me to run 25 minutes and don't stop, he thinks it's his fault, and he's calling me. What are we doing, Jeff? And I said, well, before I tell you, let me tell you about this hilarious call I got from Marcy. And he says, I went through it all with him, and I said, isn't that funny? And he said, so let me get this straight. You asked her to pray for you. She prays. She tells you exactly what to do, and you're not going to call him? I said, no, I'm not going to call him. That would be so embarrassing. He's a celebrity. And he said, you call me after you've talked to him. And he hangs up on me. So I got that to live with if and when that really happens. And so I got to the office, and at that time you could still Google him, and I Googled him, and he's at the New York Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York City, and I called. Thankfully, he didn't pick up. I left him a long voicemail, told him exactly what the doctor had said, knowing I'd never hear back from him. Well, 7 minutes later, the phone rings, and my secretary says, Dr. Oz on line 2. Well, it was Dr. Oz, and he said, if everything you're telling me is what happened, I think I can help you. What I need you to do is overnight all those records to me, everything that you have, and I'll call you back in 24 hours and tell you, if I agree or whatever. Well, obviously that was difficult because I've got my buddy, who's the cardiologist, who's telling me, get on the plane, give us a chance to save your life.
Right.
Or do I follow what I believe are our faith, God-led steps to just 24 hours. And that's when I think it got a little bit difficult, was to just try to wait that out. We decided to do that. And 24 hours later, to his word, he called and he said, yeah, it's exactly as I thought. Your heart is getting bigger and bigger, but it's not going to explode. It's going to be about, my guess would be 6 months to 18 months. And we'll have to do an open heart surgery. But, we're going to be able to use this robotic arm. It's brand new. In fact, I was on Good Morning America yesterday morning talking about it, which really just kind of blew me away, how all those little things kind of came together. Those, what I've come to learn them as God winks that go on every day. And so anyway, long story short, ended up taking about 2.5, 3 years before I did have surgery in New York City. And the night before having surgery, they do the final test to be sure everything's fine and make sure there isn't any issues with any of your arteries. And again, at that point, I'm only 42 years old. Nobody expects anything. But during that last test, they noticed that my main coronary artery was blocked over 80%. And they said I was a walking time bomb. And that the next morning, they would not only use that robotic arm so that I could still be part of their data pool, they were also going to have to open me up normally and go ahead and do all the bypasses and everything that they had to do. And so it changed from being a very serious surgery to definitely life-threatening. And I think that's when I got pretty fearful. I really thought God was either going to heal me or this was going to be a pretty simple thing, and this appeared to not be. And as they were rolling me into the operating room, for the first time in my life, I think I started questioning whether God was real, because none of this was happening the way I dreamt it. And so I prayed, and I know you're not supposed to, but I asked for a sign. I was like, God, just anything, let me know you're here. And we pushed through into the operating room, and it was just freezing in there. And I was like, okay, that's not the sign I'm looking for. I need something. And then as we got to the table, a gentleman said, okay, let's move him to the cutting board. Well,
subtle.
That level of sensitivity at that moment certainly wasn't the sign I was looking for. And I usually stop the story at that point and just share two things that you may already know partially. One is that I'm crazy about my wife, Cindy. And secondly is I have a cup of chai every morning. Okay. And it seems kind of silly, but I love to do it. And so I'm on the table, and this gentleman leans over me and says, Jeff, you've never met me before, but I'm your anesthesiologist, and I'm going to put you to sleep. More importantly, I'm going to wake you up. And he said, my name is Dr. Chiley Kaninsky, but you can call me Chai. And, I kind of thought for just a second as that sort of was sinking in, and this lady leans over me, right over my head, and she said, now, Jeff, I want you to look around and see all the staff here and all the equipment. I'm going to make sure everything goes perfectly fine. And my name is Cindy. And, I just had this warmth come over me at that moment in time, and I just knew God had just given me a couple of his winks, and I knew everything was fine. Whether I lived through that surgery or not, that wasn't the point. The point was to know that he's in control, and I'd be fine. And I obviously survived, and everything went fine. Dr. Oz did that particular surgery, and then about 15 years later, here in Oklahoma City, medical technology had moved even further, and Dr. John Randolph from here in Oklahoma City did a second one, and now I get to be on This Is Oklahoma because